All right, back in the basement again today to talk about why those $200 squat shoes might actually be holding you back from squatting more. Now, before you go and throw them away, hear me out. I do think they have their place, but most of us share a very similar origin story, being that when we first started as beginner and novice lifters, we probably weren't concerned with things like heels heights, stiffness in knee sleeves, thickness of belts, equipment at all. We just wanted to go and lift. And we liked that. We got stronger, we saw results, we got invested in getting stronger, and subsequently we invested in things that would help pursue that goal, meaning that from overnight we went 0 to 100 and bought pretty much everything under the sun, from heeled shoes to knee sleeves to belts to wrist wraps, everything you can think of. And the problem with going to 0 from 100 real quick is we gloss over all that in between, and there's a lot of good stuff there. So for today's video, I want to focus on squat shoes. Now, when I see new lifters squatting in general and learning how to squat, usually it's a form-related issue, right? Their form is a little bit sloppy, their depth is definitely high, and they struggle to hit depth. In fact, even seasoned veterans like myself can struggle to hit depth. So what do? They think they need a pair of squat shoes due to bad mobility, and they rely on those squat shoes to do a couple of things. So if I were to take a normal width stance with my toes pointed mostly forward, which is how most people start squatting initially, and try to squat down, you can see there are some problems here. I start to go up on my toes, my heels come off. It's not a very stable position. I have trouble hitting depth and balancing. So what can I do? I can add something under my heels. In this case, I'm going to show you a pair of wedges, which are going to operate very much like a squat shoe would. And it fills that gap of my heels and it allows me to stay connected to the floor, give me something to press against, but it's also going to put my body in a more mechanically advantageous position, which allows me to hit depth better. So as a new lifter, I see that and I can continue using that form, even though it might not be optimal, but the squat shoes are making up for some of my inefficiencies, and I continue to do that throughout my lifting career. The problem is if we maybe dial in the form a little bit better early on, or even later on and just correct some things, we might find a more mechanically advantageous position for ourselves based off our own body, mobility, hip structure, bar placement, that then can transfer to if we decide to use heels or not. But I will say many people actually don't need heels, but again, they haven't taken the time to actually move their body and figure out how things work because we're all unique snowflakes. So again, what I would stress is whether you're a tenured lifter or a beginner, take some time to play around with your width stance, so how wide your feet are, and your toe angle as well, and do so without a loaded barbell. I would start at a body weight, then add a bar, then maybe add a couple of plates. Figure out how your body moves and changes when you have a loaded barbell on your back versus just freestanding, and you can develop your optimal squat stance, which can then be transferred over to if you decide to go to shoes or not. Now, the other issues I have with shoes is how they're typically made, which is very narrow in the toe box, which means your toes are always going to be scrunched up. For me, it actually took an injury to the back of my heel, which limited me from wearing shoes, although I still wanted to squat. So I trained 2 weeks barefoot. And it was those 2 weeks training barefoot, even though I had over a decade of training experience under my belt, where I finally started to learn how to connect to the floor better. Some people might say grip the floor, screw your feet in, root, whatever you want to say. But because I've been wearing squat shoes for so long, I just didn't really think about my toes because they were so compact in the toe box, I wasn't really able to move them or feel them, that I was really missing out on one of these most important cues. So if you recall back in the day when I was squatting predominantly in heeled shoes, I had a lot of knee valgus where your knees are caving in. And it was just an issue that I had because I found I wasn't able to build that stability and rigidity in my legs, mostly because I wasn't doing anything with my feet, because I couldn't feel my toes and I couldn't get a good grip of the floor. But when I got injured and had to train barefoot, I was finally able to splay my toes, get a good feel, get a good connection to the floor, number one, so really rooted in. But that rooted of the floor and my feet transferred up to the rest of my lower body, meaning that I was now able to better feel my knees and where my legs traveled and be able to keep more rigid in that sense, where I've really been able to limit that knee valgus unless over really extreme heavy loads. But again, if you go to the squat shoes early on, you might not ever develop that feeling. And now that I have that, if I did want to go back to squat shoes, again, I would be able to emulate that better because I know what to expect, or maybe look for a squat shoe with a wider toe box that better fits my feet so I can get a better feel of things overall. So regardless if you're a new lifter, what I would say is in that case, consider just taking some time to develop your squat first, get everything dialed in before you start looking at equipment that's going to mask or fix potential inefficiencies. But even if you're a tenured lifter who's been lifting in heeled shoes for a long time, it's not a bad idea to start a new training cycle, either using minimal shoes or even going barefoot, because that's free, and what's free is usually pretty good for most people. But just kind of figure some things out and see if there's any room for improvement, and you might actually make the decision that you don't need to use those squat shoes at the end of the day. But I'm curious to hear your thoughts on the subject. How long have you been wearing shoes? When did you start wearing them? Let me know in the comment section below. But in the meantime, as always, thanks for watching and stay big.